Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here, the host of the System Simplified podcast, where I feature top founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And today's episode is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group, where we create, document, optimize, and implement processes and procedures so businesses can grow and thrive. And today's guest is Diane Mentzer. Hi, Diane.
Hi, Adi. How are you?
Doing great. I am so happy to have you on the podcast. I'm very excited for our conversation. We are going to talk all about operations. Because and you know what, I'm going to start with the bio first so people are going to understand who you are, and then I'm going to say why we're so excited to talk about these operations and how to leverage an actual chief operating officer or director of operation or operation manager, the second in command in a business, which we talked about a lot about the second in command, but you have such a unique approach to it in order to prepare the business to have that second in command in place. And that's what we're going to talk about. But let's start with your bio. And so you basically said that while it sounds counterintuitive, the growth company's experience can also be what's holding them back.
Yep.
That's true.
Yeah.
So because employees take on additional duties during growth until everyone is doing a little bit of everything. Yeah, it's that mishmash or mix and match of different I think, oh, that person does this, and this one does this and this. Absolutely. That's where, Diane, you come in and you help business owners untangle jumbled operations and stop doing it all.
Mm-hmm.
So they can move forward in a way that's simple, clear, and focused.
Yep.
And that is great. I mean, that's what you do with people, with identifying job descriptions, identify what people's functions are, how to implement that. And that's also what we do with processes. You know, you do it on a high level and then we go and document it, but that's what we do with processes in terms of, well, this person does this, and that, but you know what? Actually, that is when they're wearing that hat, this is the process that they're doing. For that hat, this is the process that they should be doing. And yes, maybe now they're doing it both, but if you hire somebody, that person will take that part and then this part will be left to somebody else or to that person.
Yeah. So, and like, I love what you're doing with systems. And it's like, you can't really develop those good systems until you've identified who's doing what, and you make sure that that makes sense. And you've got the handoffs and you understand, you know, where the work's being done. And then you can start. And if it's, you know, a lot of times with the business owner who is involved in a lot and they'll pop in and pop out, well, that makes it really hard to come up with standardized processes when sometimes I'm doing it, sometimes they're doing it. So it's kind of all of that really goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. Yes. So, well, first of all, before we go into the conversation, we have to give a big shout out to Jeremy Wise, Dr. Jeremy Wise from Rise 25, who introduced us. So thank you, Jeremy. Jeremy and John from Rise 25 produce my podcast. They are great friends, and they introduced me to the best guests. So thank you for introducing me to Diane. And I'm sure our listeners are going to thank you as well. All right, Diane, let's start with the challenges. What challenges do you see that entrepreneurs face in the area of operations when they try to grow and scale?
Yeah, especially with businesses that have grown organically, but really it's interesting because in conversations that I'm having with, you know, CEOs of businesses that have been in business for a long time and they're up around 20 million, they're struggling with role clarity issues, just like those $1 and $2 million businesses who are at the beginning of their scaling journey. So role clarity, which tells me role clarity is not a one and done, right? You know, it's something you need to keep coming back to and checking in on, because as you grow, things change. But especially for those businesses that have grown organically, are founder led, and they're still doing all the things. They're working in the business, more than they're working on the business, but they want to grow, not quite sure where to start. You know, there's probably some trust issues. They've handed things off before. It hasn't gone well. So maybe they're not willing to let go, or maybe it's just their baby. You know, this is their baby. How do you decide? Not clear in maybe where to start. And until you really break that down and dig into those roles, you know, that's a challenge. Another challenge I see is working with their second in command, because a true second in command and a true like visionary business owner speak different languages. You know, one is moving fast. They're talking in bullet points. It's, you know, go, 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 lots of ideas. And you've got a systems person who wants to think through things, who wants to talk in details. That drives the other person crazy. You know, so there's a lot of butting heads, and there's a lot around how to work together. And I spent most of my career not understanding that. And, you know, I actually was second in command in some really small businesses almost right out of college, or while I was even still in college, then was second in command to a division director of a large division for a long time, and then another business owner. So, and for a big chunk of that time, I didn't even realize, you know, that we were speaking different languages. And so when that kind of connected, it was like, oh my gosh, night and day, and made me really want to help these two leaders work better together, be more effective, because when they're in sync, you know, then the business can really take off, because they've got those complementary strengths that, you know, that's when the magic happens. When they realize that, define it, and start living in that space, things get better, and the ripple effects are endless. So I see it as a way to make the world a better place, because when those two are happy, everybody's happy, families are happy, you know, it just ripples out forever.
It does. You know, and I interviewed Cameron Herold on my podcast twice, and he refers to it as the yin and the yang, right? The second in command and the founder, CEO, or the visionary, however you want to call it.
Yeah.
So you work with both of them in order to prepare the business to truly have a second in command.
Mm-hmm. And I love that he uses the term second in command in that Harvard Business Review article that has the 7 types that he also talks about in his book. Is just so insightful. But for those smaller businesses, you know, they start to think, oh, you know, I need a COO, but often it's really too soon for that. And what they really need is a strong operations person who can handle those day-to-day things. And you don't want to pay strategic rates for that tactical work. And that's not really what the COO wants to do. You know, they want to be that more bigger picture strategy, helping bring that vision to life. You know, they don't want to be down there in the details as much with that lower level day-to-day. I mean, there's levels of day-to-day. And so as you're growing, you're still having somebody that's an ops person who could be your director of ops as you grow or whatever, to support that COO and the business owner. But also, you know, I see it as a journey. It really is a journey from doing it all to having that COO, that second in command in between. In a really small company, it could be an executive assistant, it could be a project director, it could be a manager, it could be a division director. But that person, when you're handing off to somebody you already know and trust, who gets the business, who knows the people, and to start building that delegation muscle and be able to start handing things off to them, knowing that they're supported. So that's why I work with both of them, because then that second in command has somebody to turn to who's been there before, who has some ideas, who can be that support. They can work through challenges. So it's why I look at it as more of coaching and advising, that, you know, digging into the tactical. It's not just coaching around mindset, but it's also digging into the tactical challenges. So
for
that
sure, it has a combination of both, you know, no doubt. So we have our listeners right now. I mean, some of them maybe are visionaries. Some of them have a second in command. Some of them don't. Maybe the second in commands are listening to us right now. What is the first step when you meet with the visionary, the owner, the founder, and whether they have a second in command right now or not, but let's say you meet with both of them, or you're preparing them to have a second in command, what's the first step? What's the first thing to do?
The first thing to do is really have that business owner, visionary, founder, CEO, whatever their title is, to have them really think through what they want their life to look like. What because often how they're spending their time every day in the business now is not what's going to get them to that desired end state, whether it's 3 years or 5, but really thinking about, the ability to take a true vacation and not take your laptop and not be on your cell phone the whole time. Is it being able to be home for dinner every night, or, go to all the kids' soccer games, or be able to start something new or add a new product or service? Really thinking about what do they want their life to look like? Where do they want their business to go? So that we can create a role that will help them do both at once, and not, oh, I've got to give up my life to grow my business. It's like, no, let's craft that role and get you the support so that you're doing both at once. And because the second in command role, there is no standard definition. It is completely dependent on stage of the business, goals for the business owners, areas of expertise, and what they're willing to let go of. And so you have to have that understanding to truly craft that second in command role. And when you start to look at what is the business owner doing now, so we do a deep dive also into how they're spending their time, what they're doing now, and we categorize it by type of work, then you can start to see what type of second in command do they need? What do they want to hand off? What do they want to keep? Because without understanding that, you could bring in an amazing person, but if they're good at the same things that you're good at, which we often like to do. We like to find people like us. Oh, you're like me. I want to work with you. Okay, well, now we have 2 people that are great at the same thing, and we still don't have anybody that's great at all the stuff that we hate doing. So really defining that so that you can get the right help, because otherwise you could bring help in and it wouldn't really be help.
Absolutely. Jan, I'm curious, when you do that exercise with the owner, the entrepreneur, what are some of the answers that you get when you ask them, paint your life? I mean, envision your life. How should your life be? What do you hear?
Well, it's definitely not, I want to work all the time, which is, what I'm doing now. Some of it has to do with the freedom to do more strategic work. So I worked with a solopreneur who was building a company, and there were aspects of the work that she really still wanted to do. And so we helped her define that so that the support we brought in would cover the things that she didn't want to do. For another, it was really being able to have more time to do things outside of the business. And so, that was what we were looking at. But a lot of it, it's really more time for the things that you love, whether it's inside the business or outside the business, things that you love. But that's how people want to spend their time, doing things that bring them joy while they still have an impact,
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Good. So you do that, you envision, then you sit down and figure out, like, what is it that we need to delegate? What's the next step after that?
Yeah, then we start to talk about delegating, look at their team, who do they have? Is there somebody that they already rely on? And then I like to I broke one element of my thing out. It's called unload your workload. So it's like a standalone experience that has some pre-work, a session, and post-work. And I like to do that with then whoever they're thinking about as their second in command too, because we need to understand what are they doing. So have them list everything for a couple of weeks. What are you doing? Then we can start to categorize it.
And you're talking about the second in command. You're doing it with the second in command.
Yeah, first
the
do it
prospective second in command. Yeah.
First do it with the business owner, then do it with the second in command, because we have to understand what they're already doing. So if we're going to be giving them other things, are there things that need to come off their plate? Are they really the right person to give things to? So kind of doing that. There's also an assessment from EOS, from Rocket Fuel University, that I like to do, the crystallizer assessment. I think it's about 10 different things. It's like, are you on the visionary side of the spectrum or integrator? So it helps you see how the puzzle pieces start to fit together. And if there's gaps and overlap, then you can figure out who's going to own what. That really plays into it too. But really, understanding who these 2 people are, how they're spending their time, so we can craft roles. And I like to do it in phases. So get them living in their space for a little while, then start to look at the rest of the leadership team, because things flow down. And so you want to make sure you've got that right before you start assigning things next level down. And if you assign stuff down and it's 2 weeks later, like, we're going to change that because I'm going to keep this. I don't feel good about this. Like, no, let's live with it for a little while, then work the next level down, get them all defined, and just keep going that way through the company, but it's more than job descriptions, because you're really starting to think about it in roles. So as we're working with each person about what are they actually doing, that helps us define the roles. Because if you sit down and you're just doing it from paper or just thinking about it, there's so many things you miss, because a lot of times we don't even realize how we're spending all our time during the day. And when you start to dig into it, and then that document, or that it's a series of spreadsheets, but then you can use it for cross-training, you can use it for revisiting every year. You know, there's so many future uses. So it's a really great one-time exercise that then the company can build on and continue to use. You know, when you cross-training for roles, you've got bench depth, you start to know who else is doing what. It's really cool how it helps them think about their company a little bit differently in terms of strengthening that structure. And then that, which ties into process work that you do, because once you know the structure and who's doing what, makes it a lot easier to define processes and get into that.
For sure. Yes, and that's very needed. So so you define the roles now. What's the next step? It seems to me like now it's rolling up the sleeves and going into implementation.
Yep, you just kind of start. And so we get the roles, then you can start to look at what are the KPIs or metrics, you know, what kind of goals do we want to set for people and teams? Then you can start figuring out what are some leading indicators that we can start monitoring on a regular basis so we know if we're on track. So starting to get them in the groove with quarterly goals, annual goals. You know, I like to use from the, you know, checking in on that. What are things that we can monitor more frequently to see if we're on track or off track. So when we get to that quarterly meeting, it's like, oh yeah, okay, we got it, or we're close, or we exceeded, you know, whatever that is, but it's not a surprise. You know, it's not like you get to it's like, oh yeah, I forgot about that for 3 months. Yeah, I'll put it on my list again, you know, but really kind of keeping that stuff front and center. So integrating their strategic plan into the day-to-day is sort of the next step. And we can look at, you know, meeting cadence. EOS has a really nice, you know, L10, their meeting structure is a way to stay focused on action versus just updates. There's different tools you can use. But, you know, it starts to get that front and center. And then, you know, then you can start getting into processes and all these other things. It's all interrelated. But if we're doing it incrementally and just sort of gradually weaving it in, it's a lot less stressful and a lot more likely to stick, because you're doing one thing at a time. And then, you know, you do this, you get the organization figured out, you get the team running smoothly, you know, you start defining your processes, you got all this stuff going. Then if you want to, you know, you get to the next level and it's like, okay, now I think we're really ready to do a full operating system implementation. It's going to go so much smoother because you already know where you are. And so when you start to think about what do things look like in 6 months, and I mean, we do that too, even if they're not doing, you know, it's not just static, but it just is going to make it go so much smoother because you have a really great grip and a good foundation to build on. Absolutely.
Diane, tell us a success story of when you actually use that methodology or those actions that are pretty simple. You know, it's not something that, you know, it is very common sense. That's what I mean. It's common sense, simple, but it's not being done. So you definitely identify the right actions to do. So give us a success story or a win or that made you feel really good that you helped a company using those steps.
Yeah. Well, you know, for a small government contractor, using those tools to define the organizational structure, really dig into that and figure out who was doing what. It was one of those companies that had grown organically and everybody was doing a little bit of everything. And we started clarifying it and finding out which pieces of their roles people liked, which pieces they didn't like, you know, so it also helped figure out, okay, what are some priority hires? How is this going to work? Allowed us to cross-train so everybody became more efficient. The business owner got at least 5 hours a week back because things were off her plate. She also trusted because now she could see it. And I think that comes into it too. When you aren't really sure what's going on, it's hard to trust that things are being done. But because we had built this out and everything was documented, there was that trust that things were getting done. So she was able to let go of some things. And then the people that also had buy-in into what they were going to be held accountable for. So it helped us also create that as, they had a say in their role and got to have that voice, which also helped us strengthen the culture. So it was, productivity improved. She got time back. The culture got stronger. It was really a great experience.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. So Diane, if people want to contact you, they want to get in touch with you, how should they do that?
Well, LinkedIn is a great place. I'm on there every day sharing insights and engaging with people. I think it's a really great virtual community and a way to interact with experts and stay on top of what's happening in the field. So that's a great place to do it. Diane Mentzer, or I think my URL is Diane Integrates, because Mentzer is hard to spell and people don't always remember it. But I'm on there a lot, and my website is dianeintegrates.com. I've got some content up there and keep updating that.
And it's a great website. So I recommend it. Our listeners will go to that website. It's very light, fun, it really shows your personality. You don't take it seriously, right? I mean, even finding the second in command is not a serious thing. I mean, we can make it happen.
Yeah. Yes, that is a great point, that, it needs to be fun. It needs to be enjoyable. And I really have a very forward focus, no point in rehashing the past, just how are we going to make it better? And that constant focus on how do we make it better? How do we grow? What is out there? What can we do in a gentle way that's not high stress and not blow everything up, but let's take what you have and just make it better, make it better, make it better. And Absolutely. I'm also an author for CEO World magazine. So I've got some fun articles in there too.
Excellent. Okay. So we'll include in our show notes a link to that as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Well, Dan, it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast and sharing your experience and sharing with us your process on how to get a second in command to be successful and to work in any company.
Oh, thank you, Addie. I really appreciate you having me on. This was such a lovely experience.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.